Welcome to Monk's Moon Temple. Tonight we will explore one of the most profound teachings in Buddhism. The teaching of emptiness. This word can sound negative, as if it means nothingness or loss. But in Zen Buddhism, emptiness means something very different. And within it lies the secret to peace and freedom. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. When the Buddha spoke of emptiness, he was pointing to something liberating. Nothing is as solid or separate as it appears. The cup that holds your tea is mostly empty space. The self you think is fixed and permanent is actually fluid and changing. Everything is connected. Everything is flowing. Tonight we will explore this theme through gentle stories and teachings. You do not need to grasp or memorize anything. Simply allow yourself to listen. Let the teachings settle naturally. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes, these ancient wisdoms will find their way into you without effort. Let's begin this gentle journey together. In Zen Buddhism, there is a teaching that seems to contradict common sense. It says that emptiness is what makes things valuable, not the solid parts. Not the material but the empty space. Think about the room you are in right now. What makes it useful? Is it the walls? The walls themselves are just barriers. What makes the room valuable is the empty space between the walls. That space allows you to move, to live, to breathe. Without emptiness, the room would be solid stone, completely useless. Or consider a cup. You might admire its shape, its color, the skill of its making. But what makes the cup actually useful? The hollow space inside, the emptiness that can hold water, tea, or wine. If the cup were solid throughout, it would be nothing more than a decorative lump. It is the empty space that gives the cup its purpose. We walk through our lives surrounded by useful emptiness, but we rarely notice it. We focus on what is there and ignore what is not there. We believe that more is better, that fullness is the goal, that emptiness is something to avoid or fill as quickly as possible. This habit shapes how we live. We fill our schedules until there is no space left. We fill our homes with possessions until there is no room to move. We fill our minds with constant noise and stimulation until there is no silence left. We are afraid of emptiness. We treat it as lack rather than as capacity. But Buddhism teaches us something different. It shows us that emptiness is not absence. Emptiness is potential. It is the space that allows things to happen. It is the silence that makes sound meaningful. It is the gaps that make wholeness possible. In Zen, this understanding goes even deeper. Emptiness is not just useful. It is the fundamental nature of all things. But we will approach this gradually, starting with what we can easily recognize. The simple truth that empty space makes things work. There is an ancient teaching that says we shape clay into a pot. But it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. The Buddha taught something similar when he spoke of how we must empty our cups before we can receive new tea. Let us explore a story that reveals this teaching. There once lived a potter named Tara who had studied her craft for 12 years under a master ceramicist. She had learned to throw perfect forms on the wheel. Her bowls were symmetrical. Her vases were elegant. Her cups had graceful proportions. Every piece she made showed technical skill and careful attention. Tara took great pride in her work. She would spend hours refining the shape of a vessel, making the walls just the right thickness, smoothing the surface until it was flawless. She thought of herself as someone who created beautiful objects. She measured her success by how perfect each piece looked. Her pottery sold well at the market. People admired the craftsmanship. But Tara noticed something that puzzled her. The pieces that sold most quickly were often not her most elaborate works. Simple plain bowls with thick walls and rough textures would disappear immediately. Her most refined vases would sit unsold for weeks. One day, an old woman came to Tara's stall. She picked up several bowls, feeling their weight, running her fingers along the rims. Finally, she chose the simplest bowl, one that Tara had made quickly without much thought. It was slightly uneven. The walls were thick. The glaze was plain. "Why did you choose that one?" Tara asked, gesturing to more elaborate pieces. "These others show much more skill. They are more beautiful." The old woman smiled and held up the simple bowl. "This one knows what it is for." Tara did not understand. "They are all for holding things. That is what bowls do." "Come with me," the old woman said. "I want to show you something." Tara was curious enough to close her stall and follow. The old woman led her through the village to a small temple. A tea ceremony was about to begin. They sat quietly at the back and watched. The tea master brought out his bowls. They were simple, rough, uneven. Some were cracked and had been repaired with gold lacquer. They looked almost crude compared to Tara's refined work. Yet, when the tea master used them, when he poured tea into them and served them to guests, something happened that Tara had never noticed before. The bowls came alive. They were not objects to be admired. They were spaces to be filled. The emptiness inside each bowl was the whole point. The tea master's hands curved around the bowls naturally. The guests received them with both hands, feeling the warmth of the tea through the thick walls. The bowls fit into the ceremony perfectly, not drawing attention to themselves, but serving their purpose completely. After the ceremony, Tara approached the tea master. "I am a potter," she said. "I have been making bowls for many years, but I see now that I did not understand what I was making." The tea master invited her to sit. He picked up one of his bowls and handed it to her. "What do you see?" Tara examined it carefully. The glaze was uneven. The shape was imperfect. There were small irregularities in the rim. "I see a bowl that could have been made better," she admitted. "The craftsmanship is rough." "Look again," the tea master said gently. "Do not look at what is there. Look at what is not there." Tara looked at the bowl, confused. What was not there? Then slowly she began to understand. She looked into the hollow center, the empty space, the nothing. "This space," the tea master said, pointing to the emptiness, "is what I made. The clay is just the container for the space. The walls exist to hold the emptiness in a useful shape." When I form a bowl, I am not making an object. I am making a capacity to hold. He took the bowl from her hands and set it down. A bowl that draws too much attention to itself has forgotten its purpose. The beautiful glaze, the perfect shape. These things can get in the way. They make you notice the bowl instead of what the bowl holds. My rough bowls remember that they are servants of emptiness. They exist to create and protect a space where tea can be received. Tara sat in silence, feeling something shift in her understanding. She had spent 12 years learning to make objects. She had never once thought about making space. She had focused entirely on the solid parts, the clay, the glaze, the form. The emptiness had been merely what was left over, an absence between the walls she carefully shaped. But emptiness is nothing, Tara said. How can nothing be what matters most? The tea master smiled. Pour tea into a bowl without emptiness. Pour it into solid stone. What happens? Tara saw immediately. The tea would run off, wasted. It could not be held, could not be served, could not fulfill its purpose. The emptiness was not nothing. It was the essential something that made the bowl a bowl. In Zen, we say that emptiness is not absence, the tea master continued. It is possibility. It is potential. The empty bowl can receive tea, rice, fruit, water, whatever you need. The filled bowl can receive nothing. Emptiness is fullness waiting to happen. It is the space where things can be. Tara walked home slowly that evening, looking at the world differently. She saw that the streets were useful because of the empty space between buildings. The doorways were valuable because of the empty space that allowed passage. Even the air she breathed moved through the empty spaces in her lungs. When she returned to her workshop, she looked at her finished pieces waiting to be sold. She had made them beautiful, but she had not made them empty enough. She had thought about the object, but not about the space. She had focused on what people would see and ignored what they would use. From that day forward, Tara approached her work differently. She began each piece not by thinking about the form, but by thinking about the emptiness she was creating. What space did she want to hold? How should that space feel? What would it be like to receive something into this particular emptiness? Her bowls changed. They became simpler, less decorated, but they became more alive. People who used them said they felt perfect in the hands. They held just the right amount. They made eating or drinking a pleasure. The bowls had become what they were meant to be. Not objects to admire, but spaces to use. One day, the old woman who had first questioned Tara returned to her stall. She picked up a new bowl and smiled. "Now this one knows what it is for," she said. Tara bowed in gratitude. "You showed me that I had been making the wrong thing. I was making clay. I should have been making emptiness." "You were always making emptiness," the old woman replied. "You just did not know you were doing it. Now you make it consciously. Now you make it with understanding. This is the difference." She held the bowl up to the light. When we understand what we are truly making, our work changes. Not because the technique changes, but because the intention changes. You're no longer trying to create impressive objects. You are creating useful space. The clay serves the emptiness, not the other way around. This is the wisdom that your teacher at the temple shared with you. This is what transforms craft into art and art into service. This story shows us the first face of emptiness, the useful void, the space that allows function. It is the emptiness that gives the bowl its essential nature. Yet we spend much of our lives trying to eliminate emptiness. We fill every moment with activity. We crowd our days with plans. We cannot tolerate silence or empty space. We believe that more is better, that busy is productive, that filled is successful. What if we have this backwards? What if the empty spaces are not wasted time, but necessary space? What if the gaps in our schedules are not failures to be filled, but opportunities to receive whatever life wants to bring? What if emptiness is not poverty but richness? When we eliminate all empty time, we lose something essential. We lose the capacity to absorb what we experience. We lose the space for insight to arise. We lose contact with ourselves because there is no quiet moment to hear our own thoughts. We become machines of constant doing, disconnected from the being that gives doing its purpose. Zen masters speak of the importance of gaps. They talk about the space between thoughts as the place where wisdom lives. They point to the silence between words as where true communication happens. The ancient masters understood this deeply. They created gardens with carefully placed rocks and much empty space. They designed temples with large open rooms. They practiced long periods of silence. They knew that emptiness was not waste but necessity. It was the ground from which everything valuable could emerge. Emptiness creates capacity for life to unfold in its own way. In a village known for its music, there lived a flute maker named Varro who crafted instruments of remarkable quality. Musicians came from distant towns to purchase his flutes. They praised the clear tone, the responsive keys, the beautiful wood he selected. Varro took great care in his work. He chose the finest hardwoods, cutting them at the right time of year when the sap had descended. He shaped the exterior of each flute with precise attention, making sure the proportions were perfect. He inlaid decorative patterns in precious metals. Each flute he made was a work of art. But Varro had a problem he did not speak about. His flutes looked perfect and sold well, but they did not sound as beautiful as he wanted. There was something missing in the tone, something that the finest flutes he had heard possessed, but his did not. He could not identify what was wrong. One autumn, a traveling musician arrived in the village. This man carried a flute that was ancient, battered, and plain. The wood was dark with age. There were no decorations. The surface was worn smooth from decades of hands. Yet when the musician played, the sound was extraordinary, pure, resonant, alive. It made Varro's carefully crafted instruments sound thin and harsh by comparison. After the performance, Varro approached the musician. "Your flute is remarkable," he said. "I am a flute maker. I would love to examine it to understand how it produces such tone." The musician smiled and handed over the old instrument. Look all you like, he said, but I will tell you now, you will not find the secret by looking at what is there. Varro examined the flute carefully. The wood was ordinary maple, nothing special. The finger holes were precisely placed, but no different from how he placed them. The craftsmanship was good, but not exceptional. Yet the flute had a quality his instruments lacked. He could not see what made the difference. I do not understand, Varro admitted. What makes this flute so special? Play it, the musician said. Varro brought the flute to his lips and blew. The sound that emerged was fuller and richer than anything his own flutes produced. He played a simple melody, amazed at how responsive the instrument was, how easily the notes flowed. Now tell me, the musician said. Where does that sound come from? What part of the flute creates it? Varro thought about this. The air moving through causes vibration. The length of the tube determines the pitch. The finger holes allow different notes. Yes, the musician agreed. But what is the tube? What is between the walls of wood? Varro looked into the bore of the flute. Empty space. Exactly, the musician said. The flute is not the wood. The flute is the emptiness. The wood exists only to shape and contain the empty space inside. When you blow across the opening, you are playing the emptiness. You are causing the air inside that hollow chamber to vibrate. The wood itself makes no sound. Only the empty space sings. Varro stood very still, holding this ancient flute. He had spent 15 years crafting flutes and he had never truly understood what a flute was. He had focused on the wood, the decoration, the external form. He had treated the hollow bore as merely the space left over after shaping the wood. He had not realized that the hollow was the instrument. Everything else was just the frame. The secret of a fine flute, the musician continued, is not in the quality of the wood or the beauty of the decoration. It is in the perfection of the emptiness. The bore must be smooth and true. The empty space must be exactly the right shape and size. Any irregularity in the emptiness affects the tone. You have been decorating the outside while neglecting the inside. You have been making wooden tubes instead of making empty spaces that sing. Varro asked if he could keep the flute for a few days to study it. The musician agreed. Varro brought the flute back to his workshop and examined it in a completely new way. He stopped looking at the wood and started paying attention to the emptiness. He measured the bore carefully. He noticed how perfectly smooth the interior was, how carefully shaped. He compared it to the bores of his own flutes and saw that his were not as refined. He had spent hours on the exterior decoration and only basic attention on the interior space. For the next several months, Varro changed his entire approach to flute making. He began by visualizing the empty space he wanted to create. What shape should the hollow be? How smooth must the interior surface become? He spent far more time refining the bore than he had ever spent before. He made the exterior simpler, putting his energy into perfecting the emptiness. The flutes he made after this were different. Musicians who tried them said they had never played instruments so responsive, so pure in tone. The flutes looked plainer than his earlier work, but they sounded like dreams. Varro understood now what his craft was really about. He was not a woodworker making decorated objects. He was a maker of emptiness. He was shaping hollow spaces that could transform breath into music. The wood was necessary, but it was the servant of emptiness, not the point. Years later, when Varro had become famous for his flutes, a young apprentice asked him, "Master, what is the secret of making a fine instrument?" Varro smiled and picked up a new flute he had just completed. "The secret is to remember that you are not making a thing. You are making nothing. You are creating the most perfect emptiness you can and then surrounding it with just enough wood to hold its shape. The emptiness is the instrument. Everything else is just the case." These two stories show us the same teaching from different points of view. The potter learned that the emptiness in a bowl is what makes it useful. The flute maker discovered that the emptiness in an instrument is what allows music. Both had to shift their attention from the solid to the empty, from what was there to what was not there. Buddhism shows us that we need emptiness. Not as something to fear or avoid but as something essential. The empty moments in our day are not wasted time. They are the space where rest happens, where insight arises, where life can breathe. When our schedules are completely full, we have no capacity to receive anything new. When our minds are constantly occupied, there is no room for fresh thought. When our homes are crowded with possessions, there is no space to live freely. The fullness we pursue actually limits us. But when we allow emptiness, we create capacity. Empty time allows spontaneity. Empty space allows movement. Empty mind allows clarity. The emptiness is not lack. It is potential waiting to be filled by whatever life brings. The Buddha taught that attachment causes suffering. But we rarely think about how our attachment to fullness itself causes suffering. We cling to the need to fill every space, occupy every moment, possess everything. This clinging exhausts us and closes us off from the natural flow of life. When we release this attachment to fullness, when we allow emptiness to exist without rushing to fill it, we discover a kind of freedom. The freedom to receive what comes rather than forcing what we think should come. The freedom to rest in the spaces between doing. The freedom to let life move through us rather than constantly pushing against it. This is not about creating emptiness for its own sake. It is about recognizing that emptiness serves life. Just as the potter serves the tea ceremony by creating bowls that hold and the flute maker serves music by creating spaces that sing, we can serve our own lives by allowing the emptiness that makes living possible. Rest now for a moment. Feel your body supported. Notice your breath moving through empty spaces. Allow yourself to simply be here without needing to fill this moment with anything other than gentle awareness. Buddhism teaches us something that sounds strange at first. It says that nothing exists independently. Everything that appears solid and separate is actually empty of independent existence. Not empty of existence itself, but empty of existing all on its own. Think about a flower. We see it and call it a flower. It seems like a complete thing in itself. But is it? The flower depends on the seed that came before it. The seed depends on another flower. The flower needs soil to grow in. The soil needs rain. The rain needs clouds. The clouds need the sun's heat. The sun needs the vast processes of nuclear fusion. Each thing we look at depends on countless other things. When we look closely, we cannot find where the flower begins and everything else ends. The flower is not separate from the soil, the rain, the sun. It is a temporary gathering of conditions. When we say flower, we are naming a process, not a thing. The flower is empty of being just a flower. It is everything that made it possible. This teaching is called dependent origination. The Buddha saw that everything arises together in dependence on everything else. Nothing stands alone. This emptiness of independent existence is not a problem. It is simply the nature of reality. When we see this clearly, our whole relationship with life changes. We stop trying to make things permanent that are naturally flowing. We stop trying to isolate ourselves from the web of connections we are part of. We see that we are not separate individuals but meeting points of countless conditions. This seeing brings both humility and freedom. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. There once lived a weaver named Kema who created cloth of remarkable quality. Her fabrics were known throughout the region for their strength and beauty. Merchants traveled long distances to purchase her work. She took great pride in her weaving, considering herself a master of her craft. Kema had a workshop filled with looms and threads of many colors. Each morning she would rise early and begin her work. The rhythmic sound of the loom filled her days. Thread by thread, she would create bolts of cloth that people used for clothing, bedding, and decorations. One autumn, a traveling monk stopped at her workshop. He had torn his robe on the journey and asked if she could repair it. Kema agreed and invited him to sit while she worked. As she examined the torn fabric, the monk watched her hands moving skillfully. "You are very good at making cloth," the monk observed. Kema smiled at the compliment. "I have been weaving for 20 years. I know my craft well." "Tell me," the monk said. "What is cloth?" Kema looked at him, puzzled by such a simple question. "Cloth is what I make. It is woven fabric. Anyone can see that." "Yes, I can see it," the monk agreed. "But what is it? Where does cloth actually exist?" Kema held up a piece of fabric she had woven recently. "It exists here in my hands. This is cloth." The monk leaned forward with interest. "Is it? Let me ask you something. If I pull out one thread, is it still cloth?" "Of course," Kema replied. "One thread makes no difference. And if I pull out another thread and another?" Kema began to see where this was leading. Well, eventually it would fall apart. It would no longer be cloth. So at what point does it stop being cloth? After 10 threads are removed? 100? Where is the exact moment when cloth becomes not cloth? Kema thought about this carefully. She had never considered such a question. "I suppose there is no exact moment. It gradually stops being cloth." The monk nodded. "Now, let me ask you something else. Before you wove these threads together, were they cloth? No, they were just threads. And what are threads made of? Cotton, in this case, she said, or sometimes wool or linen. And where does cotton come from? Kima knew this, of course. From cotton plants. The bolls are harvested and the fibers are spun into thread. So the cloth is really cotton. Yes, I suppose so. And what is cotton made of? Kima paused. She had never thought about this. I don't know. Plant fibers, I suppose. Plant cells, the monk said gently, which are made of water, minerals from the soil, and energy captured from the sun. So is your cloth really water and sunlight and earth? Kima looked at the fabric in her hands with new confusion. I have always called it cloth. That is what it is. Is it? The monk asked. Or is cloth just a name we give to a particular arrangement of cotton fibers, which are themselves arrangements of plant cells, which are arrangements of water and minerals and captured light? Where in all of this is the thing we call cloth? Kima sat very still. She was holding the fabric, but she could not say what it was anymore. When she looked closely, cloth seemed to disappear. It was threads, but threads were cotton, but cotton was plant fiber, but plant fiber was cells, but cells were elements and energy. At what point was there something she could call cloth? I am confused, Kima admitted. I have been making cloth my whole life. How can I not know what it is? The monk smiled with compassion. You know how to make it. You know how to use it. But when you look for cloth as a thing that exists in itself, independent of everything else, you cannot find it. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about emptiness. Things are empty of independent existence. They only exist in relation to everything else. Kima examined the fabric more carefully now, thinking about what the monk had said. But I can see it. I can touch it. It is real. Yes, it is real, the monk agreed. But it is not real in the way you thought. It is not a separate, independent thing. It is a meeting point of countless conditions. The cotton plant that grew from a seed. The rain that watered it. The sun that fed it. The farmer who tended it. The person who picked the cotton. The spinner who made thread. Your own hands weaving. All of these things are what you hold in your hands. When you say cloth, you are naming all of this together. He gestured to the fabric. Your cloth depends on cotton, which depends on plants, which depend on soil and rain and sun. It depends on the people who grew and processed the cotton. It depends on your skill as a weaver. It depends on the loom you use, which someone built using wood from trees, using tools made from metal, mined from the earth. When you truly look, you cannot find where cloth begins and everything else ends. Kima sat in silence for a long time, holding the fabric. She had thought she was making something. But what was she actually making? She was not creating cloth from nothing. She was arranging conditions that already existed. The cotton, the loom, her skill, her time, all of these were coming together in a particular way. The cloth was not a thing she created. It was a temporary arrangement of everything that made it possible. If cloth is empty of independent existence, Kima said slowly, then what about me? Am I also empty? The monk's eyes brightened. That is a very good question. What do you think? Kima considered this. I depend on food to live, which comes from plants and animals. I depend on water and air. I depend on my parents who gave me life. I depend on the people who taught me to weave. I depend on my customers who give me purpose and livelihood. I depend on the shelter that protects me. I depend on everything. Yes, the monk said softly. You are also empty of independent existence. Not empty of existence, but empty of existing separately from everything else. You are like the cloth, a meeting point of countless conditions. Your body is made from food you have eaten, which came from the earth. Your skills came from teachers. Your thoughts come from experiences. Where is the part of you that exists independently, separate from all of this? Kima felt something shift in her understanding. She had always thought of herself as a separate person, distinct from everything else. Kima the weaver, making her way in the world alone. But now she saw that she was not alone. She was not separate. She was part of an infinite web of connections. She existed only because everything else existed. She was held up by the whole world. This makes me feel small, Kima said. Does it? The monk asked. Or does it make you feel connected? You are not small and alone. You are part of everything. When you weave, the whole world weaves through you. The cotton plant, the rain, the sun, all the people who came before you. They are all weaving through your hands. Kima looked at her hands with wonder. They did not feel like her hands anymore. They felt like hands that belonged to everything. Hands that the whole world used to weave. In Zen, we say that when you understand emptiness, you understand interconnection, the monk continued. Nothing exists independently. So everything exists together. The flower is empty of being just a flower. So it is also the soil, the rain, the sun. You are empty of being just Kima. So you are also your parents, your teachers, the food you eat, the air you breathe. Everything interpenetrates everything else. He stood slowly, his repaired robe now whole again. Thank you for fixing my robe. You have done good work. Kima bowed. Thank you for showing me what I was really doing all these years. I thought I was making cloth, but I was participating in the world's constant weaving of itself. After the monk left, Kima returned to her loom. But everything felt different now. When she wove, she felt the sun that had fed the cotton plant. She felt the hands of the farmer who had tended it. She felt the spinner who had made the thread. She felt all the weavers who had come before her, who had taught this craft through generations. She was not weaving alone. She was the place where all of these things came together. Her cloth had not changed, but her understanding had changed completely. She no longer saw it as a separate thing she was creating. She saw it as a process she was part of. The cloth was empty of being just cloth. It was everything that made cloth possible. And she was empty of being just Kima. She was everyone and everything that made Kima possible. This understanding did not make her sad or confused. It made her grateful. She was held up by the whole world. She was part of the whole world. When she wove, the world wove through her. She could not fail because she was not separate from everything that supported her. From that day forward, Kima's weaving became a kind of meditation. Each thread she placed reminded her of how everything depends on everything else. Each piece of cloth she made was a celebration of interconnection. And when people bought her fabric, she would sometimes tell them, "This cloth is made of cotton and sunlight and rain and soil and many people's hands. When you wear it, you wear the whole world." This story shows us what emptiness of independent existence means. Kima discovered that cloth is empty of being just cloth. It is actually cotton, which is actually plant cells, which are actually water and minerals and captured sunlight. When we look for cloth as a thing in itself, we cannot find it. We only find the web of conditions that creates what we call cloth. The same is true for everything. A table is empty of being just a table. It is wood, which is tree, which is soil and water and sun. A person is empty of being just themselves. They are parents and teachers and food and air and experiences. Nothing stands alone. Buddhism calls this dependent origination. Everything arises together, depending on everything else. When we see this clearly, we stop clinging to things as if they were permanent and separate. We see them as flowing processes, temporary arrangements of conditions. This seeing brings freedom because we stop trying to make permanent what is naturally changing. There once lived a scholar named Marco who studied philosophy at a monastery in the mountains. He had read many texts about Buddhist teachings, including teachings about emptiness. He understood them intellectually. He could explain them clearly. But he wanted to understand them directly, not just as ideas in his head. One spring morning, Marco decided to take a walk in the forest near the monastery. The trees were just beginning to show new leaves. Birds were singing. The air was warm and fresh. As he walked, he thought about emptiness. He had read that all things are empty of independent existence. But what did that really mean? How could he see it directly instead of just thinking about it? Marco stopped in front of a large oak tree. It was old and thick, its bark rough with age. It looked completely solid, completely real, completely there. This was a tree. No question about it. How could this tree be empty? He remembered the teaching, empty does not mean non-existent. It means empty of independent, permanent, separate existence. The tree exists, but not in the way it appears to exist, not as a solid, separate thing. Marco decided to investigate. He sat down at the base of the tree and looked at it carefully. What is this tree? Where does tree actually exist? He touched the bark. Rough and thick, full of deep grooves. Was the bark the tree? He could peel some of it away and the tree would still be there. So the bark was not the essential tree. He looked at the leaves. Thousands of them moving slightly in the breeze. Were the leaves the tree? In winter, This tree would have no leaves and would still be a tree. So the leaves were not the essential tree. He examined the branches. Strong and spreading, reaching toward the sky. Were the branches the tree? If a storm broke off a large branch, the tree would still be there. So the branches were not the essential tree. What about the trunk? Surely the trunk was the tree. But Marco knew that the trunk was made of wood, and wood was made of cells, and cells were made of water and minerals and compounds. The trunk was not a solid thing. It was a structure made of smaller structures, which were made of even smaller structures. And where did these structures come from? The tree had grown from a seed. The seed had come from another tree. That tree had grown from another seed. Back and back. Tree following tree. Seed following seed. This tree was not separate from all the trees that came before it. What fed this tree? Water from the soil. Where did the water come from? Rain. Where did rain come from? Clouds. Where did clouds come from? Evaporated water from rivers and oceans. The tree was not separate from the rain, the clouds, the rivers, the oceans. What else fed the tree? Minerals from the soil. Where did they come from? Broken down rock, dead leaves, dead animals, centuries of life and death enriching the earth. The tree was not separate from all of this decay and transformation. What else? Sunlight. The leaves captured energy from the sun and turned it into growth. The tree was made partly of captured light. It was solid sunlight in a sense. The tree was not separate from the sun. And what about the air? The tree breathed in carbon dioxide and breathed out oxygen. It was constantly exchanging with the atmosphere. Where did the tree end and the air begin? They were not separate. Marco sat there for a long time looking at the tree. The more he looked, the less he could find anything to call tree. There was bark, which was made of cells, which were made of compounds, which came from soil and water and air and sun. There were leaves and branches and trunk. But all of these were made of other things, which were made of still other things, which came from the whole world. When he tried to find the essence of tree, the thing that made it a tree independent of everything else, he could not find it. The tree was empty of treeness. It was only tree in relation to everything else. It was a temporary gathering of soil and water and air and sun and the seeds of previous trees and the work of microorganisms in the soil and the cycles of seasons. Tree was a word he used to point to this gathering. But the gathering itself had no fixed boundary. It flowed into everything around it. The tree was not separate from the forest. The forest was not separate from the mountain. The mountain was not separate from the earth. The earth was not separate from the sun. Nothing was separate from anything. Marco felt dizzy. He had been sitting still, but his mind felt like it was falling. All the boundaries he had believed in were dissolving. He could not find where one thing ended and another began. Just then, an old monk from the monastery appeared on the path. He saw Marco sitting at the base of the tree looking confused and sat down beside him. "Are you well?" the old monk asked. I am trying to understand emptiness, Marco said. I have been looking at this tree trying to find what it is. But the more I look, the less I can find. Where is the tree? The old monk smiled. Did you lose it? No, I mean, where does tree actually exist? I cannot find the boundary between tree and not tree. Everything flows into everything else. Ah, the old monk said. You are beginning to see. The Buddha taught that when we look for the essence of things, we cannot find it. Not because it is hidden, but because it does not exist in the way we think it does. Things exist only in relationship. They are empty of existing independently. He gestured to the tree. This tree is empty of being just a tree. It is soil expressing itself. It is water expressing itself. It is sunlight expressing itself. It is the whole universe gathering here in this shape for a time before dispersing again into other shapes. Marco felt something release in his chest. So when I look for tree as a separate thing, I cannot find it because it is not a separate thing. It is everything coming together. Yes, the monk said. And this is not just true of trees. It is true of everything, including you. When you look for Marco as a separate, independent being, what do you find? Marco thought about this. His body was made of food which came from plants and animals which came from the earth. His thoughts came from his teachers, from books, from experiences. His breath was air he shared with every living thing. His very existence depended on his parents, their parents, back and back. He depended on the society that educated him, the farmers who grew his food, the countless people whose work made his life possible. Where was the part of Marco that existed independently? He could not find it. He was also empty of independent existence. He was also everything coming together temporarily in this form. I feel like I am disappearing, Marco said quietly. Does it feel bad? The old monk asked. Marco checked inside himself. Strangely, it did not feel bad. It felt like relief, like putting down a heavy burden. He had been trying to be Marco, separate and independent, standing alone. But he was not alone. He was held up by everything. He was part of everything. There was no separation. It feels like freedom, Marco said with surprise. I do not have to hold myself together as a separate thing. I am already connected to everything. The old monk nodded. This is the gift of understanding emptiness. We stop feeling isolated and alone. We see that we are part of the web of life. We are not separate individuals struggling by ourselves. We are meeting points where the whole universe gathers and expresses itself. This is not a loss. It is a discovery. He stood slowly. Keep sitting with this tree. Keep looking. The more you see emptiness, the more you will see interconnection. They are the same teaching. Empty of separation means full of connection. Marco sat under the tree for the rest of the day. Sometimes the boundaries would seem solid again, and tree would appear as separate tree, and he would appear as separate self. But then he would look more closely, and the boundaries would dissolve again. Everything flowing into everything else. nothing standing alone. By evening when he returned to the monastery, something had changed in him. He could not quite say what, but the world felt different. Less solid, more fluid. Less divided into separate things, more like one continuous process expressing itself in countless forms. When his teacher asked him what he had learned, Marco said, "I went looking for a tree and found a whole world. I went looking for myself and found I cannot be found because I am everything." His teacher smiled. "Now you are beginning to understand emptiness. Not with your thinking mind, but with your seeing. Keep looking. The more you see, the more the teaching will reveal itself." These two stories show us the same truth. Kima discovered that cloth is empty of independent existence. It is only cloth in relation to cotton, which is only cotton in relation to plants, which exist only in relation to soil and water and sun. Marco discovered that tree is empty of independent existence. It is only tree in relation to everything that makes tree possible. This teaching applies to everything, including ourselves. We think of ourselves as separate individuals. But when we look closely, we cannot find where we end and everything else begins. We are empty of independent existence. We exist only in relationship to everything that makes us possible. This is not a problem. This is liberation. When we see that we are not separate, we stop feeling alone. When we see that we depend on everything, we feel grateful. When we see that we are part of the web of life, we find our place. The Buddha taught dependent origination as the middle way between two extremes. One extreme says nothing exists. The other extreme says things exist independently. The truth is in the middle. Things exist, but only in dependence on everything else. This is what emptiness means. Empty of independent existence, full of interconnection. Rest now in this understanding. You are not separate from this moment. You are not separate from your breath. You are not separate from what supports you. Let yourself rest in the web of connection that holds you. Buddhism teaches something that can feel unsettling at first. It says that the self you think of as solid and unchanging is actually empty. Not empty of existence, but empty of fixed, permanent nature. The self is not one thing. It is a flowing process, constantly changing, never the same from moment to moment. We think of ourselves as having a core identity. I am this kind of person. This is who I am. But when we look closely, we cannot find this fixed self anywhere. What we find instead is a constantly changing stream of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and experiences. We find different selves arising in different situations. We find that who we are depends on where we are, who we are with, what we are doing. The Buddha called this teaching anatta, which means no self or not self. He was not saying we do not exist. He was saying we do not exist in the way we think we do. We are not fixed, permanent, separate entities. We are fluid, changing, interconnected processes. This understanding is one of the most liberating teachings in all of Buddhism. When we cling to a fixed idea of who we are, we suffer. We try to maintain an image that is always shifting. We resist changes that are natural and inevitable. We feel threatened when life asks us to be different than we think we should be. But when we see the empty, fluid nature of self, we find freedom. Freedom to respond to each moment freshly, without the burden of defending a fixed identity. Let us explore a story that reveals this truth. There once lived a man named Tomo who served as a guard at a great estate. He had held this position for many years and took it very seriously. His job was to protect the household, to keep watch, to remain alert for any danger. He wore armor and carried weapons. He stood at his post for long hours. He saw himself as a warrior, strong and vigilant. Tomo was good at his work. The family who employed him trusted him completely. Other guards looked up to him as someone who embodied what a guard should be. Fierce when needed, disciplined always, ready to fight if necessary. This was who Tomo was. This was his identity. He was a guard, a protector, a warrior. But Tomo's life was not only his work. He had a wife and 2 young children. When he returned home each evening, he would remove his armor and weapons at the door. His wife would greet him with warmth. His children would run to him with excitement. And something would shift in Tomo. At home, he was not a warrior. He was gentle, patient, playful. He would sit on the floor and let his children climb on him. He would listen to his wife talk about her day. He would help prepare the evening meal. He would tell stories in soft voices. This Tomo bore little resemblance to the fierce guard who stood watch all day. Sometimes, when his children were asleep, Tomo would wonder about this. Who was he really? Was he the stern warrior or the gentle father? Both felt real when he was in those roles, but they seemed like completely different people. There was also another Tomo. When he visited the monastery to make offerings, he became quiet and humble. He would bow deeply before the monks. He would speak in a deferential tone. He would see himself as a simple man seeking guidance, not as a warrior at all. In the presence of the monks, especially the abbot whom he deeply respected, Tomo felt small and uncertain. All his fierceness would dissolve. And there was yet another Tomo. When he gathered with other guards to drink and share stories, he became boisterous and loud. He would laugh freely. He would boast about his skills. He would clap his friends on the back with force. This Tomo was neither the fierce guard nor the gentle father nor the humble supplicant. He was someone else entirely. One day, Tomo was standing at his post when a traveling monk approached the estate gates. The monk was old, with kind eyes and a simple robe. He asked if he might rest in the garden for a short while before continuing his journey. Tomo, who was always courteous to monks, welcomed him and showed him to a quiet spot. The monk thanked him and sat down beneath a tree. But instead of closing his eyes to rest, he watched Tomo return to his post. After a few moments, he called out softly, "Guard, may I ask you something?" Tomo approached. "Of course, honored teacher." "Who are you?" the monk asked. Tomo straightened. "I am Tomo, guard of this household." "Ah," the monk said. "So you are a guard. That is your nature." "Yes," Tomo said with certainty. I have been a guard for many years. It is what I do. It is who I am. I see, the monk said. And when you go home to your family, are you still a guard? Tammo paused. Well, no. At home, I am a husband and father. So, at home, you are not a guard. I am still a guard by profession. But when I am with my family, I am different. Different how? Tammo thought about this. Softer, gentler. I play with my children. I help my wife. I am not fierce at all. So which is the real you? The monk asked. The fierce guard or the gentle father? Tammo felt confused. Both are real. I am both. And when you visit the monastery to make offerings, who are you then? I am a devotee, humble, seeking wisdom. And when you drink with your fellow guards, I am loud, boastful, free. The monk smiled gently. So we have fierce Tammo, gentle Tammo, humble Tammo, and boastful Tammo. Which of these is the real Tammo? Which is your true self? Tammo stood very still. He had never thought about this so directly. When someone asked who he was, he would answer with his role, his profession. But the monk was asking something deeper. Which of these different Tammos was his actual self? I do not know, Tammo admitted. They are all me, but they are all different. Yes, the monk said. They are all you, and they are all different. So what does that tell you about the self you think you have? Tammo sat down on the grass near the monk, forgetting his post for a moment. It tells me that I am not one fixed thing. I change depending on where I am and who I am with. Exactly, the monk said. The Buddha taught that the self is empty of fixed nature. You are not one permanent Tammo. You are many Tammos, arising in response to different conditions. With your Lord, you are fierce Tammo. With your children, you are gentle Tammo. With monks, you are humble Tammo. With friends, you are free Tammo. Which is the mask and which is the real face? Tammo thought deeply about this. Maybe they are all real. Maybe none of them is more true than the others. Yes, the monk said. And if they are all real and they are all different, then what is the self that underlies them all? Can you find it? Tammo looked inside himself, trying to find the core Tammo that existed beneath all the different versions. But he could not find it. There was no essential Tammo hiding underneath. There were only the different Tammos that appeared in different circumstances. Fierce in danger, gentle with children, humble before wisdom, free among friends. Each one arose naturally in response to the situation. I cannot find one fixed self, Tammo said slowly. When I look for it, all I find are these different ways of being. This is what the Buddha meant by empty self, the monk explained. Not that you do not exist. You clearly exist. But you do not exist as a fixed, unchanging entity. You exist as a fluid process, responding to conditions, changing moment by moment. The self you think is so solid is actually empty of solidity. It shifts like water, taking the shape of whatever container it finds itself in. Tamo felt something like relief. He had always felt slightly dishonest, being so different in different places. He had wondered which version was the real him, and worried that the others were somehow false. But now he saw that they were all real. The self was not a fixed thing to maintain. It was a fluid response to life. But if I have no fixed self, Tamo asked, then who am I? The monk laughed softly. You are Tamo. But Tamo is not a thing. Tamo is a happening. Tamo is the name you give to this particular stream of consciousness, this particular body, this particular collection of habits and tendencies. But the stream flows, the body changes, the habits shift. You are not the same Tamo you were 10 years ago. You will not be the same Tamo 10 years from now. You are always Tamo, but Tamo is always changing. He picked up a handful of water from a small fountain nearby. Try to grab this water and hold it still. It slips through your fingers. Tamo watched. Yes, it keeps flowing. It will not be held. The self is like this, the monk said. You cannot grab it and make it stay one way. It keeps flowing, keeps changing, keeps responding to each new moment. Tamo watched the water drip through the monk's fingers. He thought about how he had spent years trying to maintain a consistent image of himself as a strong warrior. But that was only one face of many faces. And even that face changed. Some days he felt strong. Some days he felt tired. Some moments he was alert. Other moments his mind wandered. Nothing stayed the same. This teaching, Tamo said, does it mean I should not care who I am? Does it mean nothing matters? No, the monk said firmly. It means you are free to respond appropriately to each situation without being bound by a fixed idea of who you should be. When your Lord needs you to be fierce, you can be fierce. When your children need you to be gentle, you can be gentle. You do not have to pretend to be one thing all the time. You can be fluid, responsive, alive to what each moment asks of you. He stood and prepared to continue his journey. The empty self is not a loss. It is a freedom. When you stop clinging to a fixed identity, you stop suffering the constant effort of maintaining that identity. You become like water, fitting naturally into whatever space life provides without struggle, without resistance. After the monk left, Tamo returned to his post. But he stood there differently. He was still a guard. He was still alert. But he was not clinging to being a guard as his essential self. He was simply being what this moment required. And when evening came and he went home to his family, he would be what that moment required. Neither was more real than the other. Both were Tamo. But Tamo was not fixed. Tamo was flow. This story reveals the fluid nature of self. Tamo discovered that he was not one fixed person but many different expressions arising in response to different conditions. The fierce guard, the gentle father, the humble devotee, the free friend. None of these was more real than the others. All were genuine expressions of Tamo. But Tamo himself was not fixed as any one of them. The monk showed him that the self is empty of permanent nature. Not empty of existence, but empty of being one unchanging thing. We are like water, taking the shape of whatever container we find ourselves in. This is not dishonesty or inconsistency. This is the natural responsiveness of a self that is not frozen into one form. When we cling to a fixed identity, we suffer. We try to be the same person in every situation. Even when different situations call for different responses, we feel we are betraying ourselves when we change. When actually we are simply being appropriate to the moment. The empty self is free to be what each moment needs, without the burden of maintaining a rigid image. Tomo found freedom in this understanding. He could be fierce when fierceness served. He could be gentle when gentleness served. He was not bound to being one thing forever. He could flow through life, responding freshly to each new circumstance without feeling he was losing himself in the process. Let us explore another story that shows this teaching through the experience of loss. In a coastal town known for its trade, there lived a merchant named Rina who had built a successful business over 20 years. She owned 3 ships that carried goods between ports. She had a large house filled with fine things. She employed many people. She was known throughout the region as Rina the merchant, a woman of wealth and importance. Rina had worked hard for everything she possessed. She had started with nothing, just her clever mind and willingness to take risks. She had built her trading business carefully, learning from mistakes, seizing opportunities. By the time she was 40, she was one of the most respected merchants in the town. She identified strongly with this role. When people asked who she was, she would describe her business, her ships, her success. She was a merchant. This was not just what she did. It was who she was. Her sense of self was built on this foundation. I am successful. I am wealthy. I am important. These things defined her. One autumn, disaster struck. A great storm rose up suddenly while 2 of her ships were at sea. Both ships sank. The cargoes were lost. The crews barely survived. This was a terrible blow, but Rina was resilient. She still had 1 ship. She could rebuild. But before she could recover, a fire swept through the warehouse district where she stored her goods. Everything burned. Years of accumulated inventory. All the merchandise she had planned to sell, gone in a single night. And there was more. The fire spread to several buildings she owned, reducing them to ashes. Within a matter of weeks, Rina lost almost everything. Her ships were gone. Her inventory was destroyed. Her properties were burned. She had debts she could no longer pay. Her creditors began demanding payment. When she could not pay, they took what remained. Her house, her fine possessions, everything. Rina found herself at the age of 42 with almost nothing. She moved into a small room above a fishmonger's shop. She had no business, no ships, no employees, no wealth. The life she had built for 20 years had collapsed. At first, she felt completely lost. She would wake in the morning in the small room and not know who she was. For 2 decades, she had been Rina the merchant. That identity had organized her entire life. It had told her what to do each day. It had given her purpose and direction. It had made her someone. But now she was not a merchant. She had no business to run, no ships to manage, no deals to make. Who was she now? When she looked inside herself for an answer, she found only emptiness. The identity she had built so carefully was gone, and underneath it, there was nothing she could recognize as herself. She fell into deep sadness. She felt like she had died, even though her body still lived. Rena the merchant was dead. And whoever was left in this small room did not feel real. Did not feel like anyone at all. One morning, unable to bear the emptiness, Rena walked to the temple at the edge of town. She had not been there in years. When she was successful, she had sent donations but rarely visited herself. She was too busy. But now she had nothing but time. She sat in the temple courtyard, watching monks go about their morning routines. A young nun noticed her sitting alone and approached. "You look troubled, sister. May I sit with you?" Rena nodded, grateful for any company. The nun sat beside her in comfortable silence for a while, then asked gently, "What brings you here today?" "I have lost everything," Rena said simply. "I do not know who I am anymore." "Tell me what you lost." "My business, my ships, my home, my wealth, my position. Everything I worked for. Everything I was." "Ah," the nun said. "You lost what you had and what you did, but did you lose who you are?" Rena looked at her with confusion. "That is the same thing. I was a merchant. That was who I was." "Was it?" the nun asked gently. "Before you were a merchant, who were you?" "I was a girl, a young woman starting out." "And were you someone then? Did you exist?" "Of course I existed." "So you existed before you became a merchant. You existed before you gained wealth and ships and property. You were someone before you had all those things." Rena thought about this. It was true. She had existed before she had anything. She had been a person before she became successful. But that seemed like a different person, a different life. That girl, Rena said, she was full of dreams and energy. She wanted to build something. She became the merchant. When the merchant died, the girl died too. "Did she?" the nun asked. "Or did you only lose the roles and possessions you had gathered around that original self? The ships were not you. The house was not you. The business was not you. These were things you had, not things you were. When you lost them, you lost what you possessed. But who you are was never in those possessions." Rena felt tears welling up. "But I built my whole life around being a merchant. I defined myself by my success. Without it, I am nothing." The nun took Rena's hand gently. "You are not nothing. You are sitting here. You are breathing. You are feeling sadness. You are alive. The you that exists right now in this moment has no ships and no business and no wealth. But you still exist. So clearly you are not your possessions or your roles. You are something else. Something that was there before you gained all those things and is still here now that they are gone. But what is that something? Rena asked desperately. When I look for it, I cannot find it. I only see emptiness. Yes, the nun said with a slight smile. Emptiness. The Buddha taught that the self is empty. Not empty of existence, but empty of fixed nature. You thought yourself was merchant. You thought yourself was wealthy, successful, important. But these were just roles you took on. They were never your essential nature. They were costumes you wore. When the costumes were removed, you discovered emptiness underneath. But this emptiness is not nothing. It is freedom. Rena did not understand. How can emptiness be freedom? I feel lost. I feel like I disappeared. The nun stood and gestured for Rena to walk with her. They walked through the temple gardens where monks were tending vegetables. Look at that monk there, the nun said, pointing to a young man pulling weeds. Who is he? He is a monk, Rena said. Yes, but before he became a monk, he was a farmer's son. Before that, he was a baby. After this, he may become a teacher, or he may leave the monastery and become a husband and father. Which of these is his real self? Monk, farmer's son, baby, teacher, father. All of them, I suppose. Yes, the nun said. And none of them. Each is a role he takes on for a time. Each is real while it lasts. But none is his permanent, fixed self. Underneath all these roles, what is he? Rena looked at the young monk carefully. I do not know. Neither does he, the nun said. And that not knowing is liberation. Because he is not fixed as one thing. He is free to be what each moment requires. When it is time to weed, he weeds. When it is time to meditate, he meditates. When it is time to teach, he teaches. He does not cling to any role as his permanent identity. He flows. They walked further into the garden. You clung to being a merchant. You made it your permanent identity. You thought that was who you were. But life showed you that this identity could be taken away. The ships could sink. The warehouse could burn. The wealth could disappear. And when it did, you felt like you had disappeared too. But you did not disappear. Only your identification with a temporary role disappeared. The nun stopped walking and turned to face Rena directly. The emptiness you feel is not the absence of self. It is the absence of fixed self. And this absence is your freedom. You are not bound to being a merchant anymore. You are not required to be successful or wealthy or important. You can be anything. You can become anyone. The emptiness is not lack. It is potential. Rena felt something shift inside her. The terrible feeling of being nothing began to feel less like death and more like openness. She was not a merchant anymore. She did not have to be a merchant. She could be something else. She could be someone else. Or she could be no one in particular. Just a person alive, breathing, existing. But what should I do? Rina asked. If I am not a merchant, what am I? The nun smiled. You are Rina, and Rina is not a fixed thing. Rina is a flow. Right now, in this moment, what does this moment need from you? Rina looked around. She was in a garden. There were vegetables growing, weeds that needed pulling. This moment needs someone to help with the garden, perhaps. Would you like to help? Rina had never pulled weeds in her life. When she was building her business, such work was beneath her. She was important. She had people to do such things. But now she was not important. She was just a person in a garden. And the work was there. She knelt down and began pulling weeds. Her hands found the rhythm of it. Pull, toss, pull, toss. It was simple work. There was something peaceful about it. She was not thinking about who she was or what she had lost. She was just pulling weeds. After a while, the nun knelt beside her and worked too. They pulled weeds together in silence. And in that silence, Rina felt more real than she had felt in weeks. She was not playing a role. She was not maintaining an image. She was just doing what this moment asked, pulling weeds, being alive, being no one in particular. When they finished, the nun said, "Tomorrow, if you wish, you can come back and help again, or you can do something else. It does not matter. The point is to be what each moment needs without clinging to any fixed idea of who you are." This is how we live. When we understand empty self, we respond to life without the burden of defending a permanent identity. Rina did come back the next day. And the day after that. She helped in the garden. She learned to cook simple meals in the temple kitchen. She swept floors. She did all the work she once thought was beneath her. And gradually, something began to heal inside her. She was not rebuilding her identity as a merchant. She was discovering how to exist without a fixed identity at all. Some days she felt like a gardener. Some days like a cook. Some days like a simple woman doing simple tasks. None of these felt permanent. All of them felt true in the moment. After several months, a former business associate found her at the temple. He had a small opportunity, a single shipment he needed help arranging. Would she be interested? There was not much money in it, but it was work. Rina considered the offer. She could do this work. She knew how. But she did not need to become Rina the merchant again to do it. She could arrange one shipment without making it her whole identity. She could help without clinging to a role. She accepted the work, and it went well. Other small opportunities followed. Gradually she began trading again. But it was different now. She was not building an identity. She was not trying to become important or wealthy. She was simply doing work that came to her, responding to opportunities, helping where she could help. Within a few years, she was successful again. But when people asked who she was, she did not say, "I am a merchant." She would say, "I am Rina. Sometimes I arrange trade. Sometimes I pull weeds in the temple garden. Sometimes I cook. Sometimes I sit quietly. I am not any one thing. The nun who had become her teacher smiled when she heard this. Now you understand empty self, not as loss but as freedom. You are not bound by any fixed identity. You can be what each moment needs. This is how we live. When we see clearly, Buddhism teaches that clinging to a fixed sense of self causes suffering. We build an identity and then spend enormous energy trying to maintain it. We feel threatened when life asks us to change. We resist the natural flow of growth and transformation. We hold ourselves to being one way even when another way would serve better. But when we see that the self is empty of fixed nature, we find freedom. We can be fierce when fierceness serves. We can be gentle when gentleness serves. We can be successful when success arises. We can be simple when simplicity is appropriate. We are not bound to being one thing forever. We can flow like water, taking the shape that each moment requires. The empty self is not a problem to solve. It is the nature of what we are. When we stop fighting this nature, when we stop trying to freeze ourselves into permanent shapes, we discover a lightness and ease. We can respond to life freshly instead of defending an outdated image. We can grow and change without feeling like we are betraying ourselves. We can be fully who we are in each moment, because who we are is not a fixed thing but a living response. Rest now in this moment. You do not need to be anyone in particular. You do not need to maintain any image. Simply be here, breathing, aware, empty of fixed form, full of presence. There is a teaching in Zen that invites us to look at the stories we tell about our experiences. We encounter something and immediately give it meaning. This is good. That is bad. This is fortunate. That is unfortunate. We wrap our experiences in narrative so quickly that we forget we are doing it. We think the meanings we assign are inherent in the events themselves. But Buddhism shows us that these meanings are empty. Not the events themselves, but the stories we tell about them. Good and bad are not qualities that exist in things. They are judgments we place on things. Fortune and misfortune are not fixed realities. They are interpretations based on limited perspective. When we see this clearly, something remarkable happens. We stop being so tossed around by circumstances. An event occurs and we no longer rush to label it as disaster or blessing. We can hold it more lightly, knowing that what seems terrible today may reveal gifts tomorrow, and what seems wonderful now may bring difficulties later. We become more spacious, less reactive, more able to respond wisely to whatever life brings. This does not mean nothing matters or that we should not care about what happens. It means we can care deeply while holding our interpretations lightly. We can prefer joy to suffering without insisting that we know which is which in every moment. We can trust that life is larger than our stories about it. Let us explore a story that reveals this teaching. In a farming village surrounded by hills, there lived a man named Ojo who worked a small plot of land. He was neither wealthy nor poor. He had enough to feed his family and occasionally a little extra to trade. His life was simple and steady. He had one son, a strong young man who helped with the heavy work. Ojo also had one horse, a sturdy animal that pulled the plow and carried loads. This horse was valuable to him. Without it, the work would be much harder. The horse was old, but still strong, still reliable. Ojo took good care of it. One morning, Ojo went out to the field and discovered that the horse was gone. The fence had a break in it. The horse must have wandered through during the night. Ojo searched the nearby fields and woods, but could not find the animal anywhere. It had simply disappeared. The neighbors heard about the missing horse and came to offer sympathy. "What terrible luck," they said. "What a misfortune. How will you plow your fields? This is very bad for you." Ojo listened to their words and nodded, but he said only, "Perhaps. We will see." The neighbors found his response strange. Of course, this was bad luck. He had lost his horse. How could it be anything but misfortune? But Ojo did not seem upset. He simply accepted what had happened and went about his work, doing what he could without the horse. A week passed. One morning, Ojo heard sounds outside his house. He went out and saw his horse returning. But the horse was not alone. Following behind it were 3 wild horses, strong and beautiful. The old horse had found a wild herd in the hills and led them back. The neighbors heard about this and rushed over. "What wonderful luck," they said. "What good fortune. Now you have 4 horses instead of 1. You can sell the extra horses or use them for work. This is very good for you." Ojo listened to their excitement and nodded. But he said only, "Perhaps. We will see." Again, the neighbors found his response puzzling. Of course, this was good luck. He had gained 3 valuable horses. How could it be anything but fortunate? But Ojo remained calm, neither celebrating nor claiming to know what this development would bring. The next week, Ojo's son began the work of taming the wild horses so they could be used. One of the horses was particularly spirited and difficult. As the son tried to break it to saddle, the horse bucked violently and threw him off. The young man landed badly and broke his leg. The injury was serious. The bone had broken in a difficult way. The village healer said it as best he could, but everyone could see that the leg would take many months to heal. Even then, the son might walk with a limp. He certainly could not help with the farm work during the busy growing season. The neighbors came again with sad faces. "What terrible luck," they said. "What a misfortune. First you gain horses, but now your son is injured. You have no one to help with the heavy work. The new horses have brought you only trouble. This is very bad for you." Ojo sat beside his son's bed and listened to the neighbor's words. But he said only, "Perhaps. We will see." The neighbors shook their heads. Ojo's calm response seemed like denial. Obviously, this was terrible luck. His son was injured right when he was needed most. How could this be anything but disaster? 2 weeks later, soldiers came to the village. The emperor had declared war on a neighboring kingdom and was conscripting young men for the army. Every household had to send their sons and young men to fight. The soldiers went from house to house, taking the young men away. Many were weeping. Everyone knew that war was brutal and that many of these young men would not return. When the soldiers came to Ojo's house, they looked at his son lying there with a broken leg. "This one cannot fight," they said, and moved on to the next house. Ojo's son was the only young man in the village who was not taken away to war. The neighbors came once more, this time with awe in their voices. "What incredible luck," they said. "What amazing fortune. Your son's injury saved him from war. The broken leg was actually a blessing. This is very good for you." Ojo looked at his son, whose leg was still painful and would be weak for many months. He looked at the other families in the village who were grieving the loss of their sons. And he said only, "Perhaps. We will see." One of the neighbors, an older man named Karno, stayed after the others left. He sat with Ojo in silence for a while, then said, "I notice that you never agree when we call things good luck or bad luck. You always say, 'Perhaps.' Why is this?" Ojo poured tea for both of them and sat quietly before answering. When the horse ran away, everyone said it was bad luck. But the horse brought back 3 wild horses. When the wild horses came, everyone said it was good luck. But one of them threw my son and broke his leg. When my son's leg broke, everyone said it was bad luck. But the broken leg saved him from going to war. He sipped his tea slowly. Each time, what looked like misfortune turned into fortune, and what looked like fortune turned into misfortune. The truth is, I do not know which is which. What seems bad today may be the seed of something good tomorrow. What seems good today may bring difficulties I cannot see yet. The events themselves are empty of being good or bad. I give them these meanings based on my limited view. Karno nodded slowly, beginning to understand. So you do not judge things as good or bad. I have preferences, Ojo said. I would prefer that my horse not run away. I would prefer that my son not break his leg. But I hold these preferences lightly. I do not know the whole story. I see only a small part of a much larger pattern. When I insist on calling something good or bad, I am making a judgment based on incomplete knowledge. But surely some things are truly bad, Karno said. If your son had died, would that not be bad? Ojo was quiet for a long moment. I would grieve. I would feel great sorrow. But would I be right to call it bad luck? I do not know what comes from what. I do not know the larger pattern. Perhaps his death would save others somehow. Perhaps his life would bring suffering I cannot see. I am not wise enough to judge. I can only see what is in front of me right now. He looked at Karno directly. The Buddha taught that we suffer because we cling to our ideas about how things should be. We call something bad and we resist it. We call something good and we grasp at it. But the labels we use are empty. They are our stories, not the truth of things. When we hold our stories more lightly, we suffer less. Karno sat with this teaching. He thought about all the times he had been certain something was terrible, only to find gifts hidden in it later. He thought about all the times he had celebrated good fortune, only to face difficulties that followed from it. He realized that Ojo was right. He did not know which was which. He was always judging based on immediate appearance, not on the full unfolding of events. "How did you learn this?" Carnot asked. "To hold your judgment so lightly." Ojo smiled. "Life taught me, again and again. What I called disaster turned into blessing. Again and again, what I called blessing turned into challenge. Eventually, I understood that my labels were not describing reality. They were describing my limited view of reality. Once I saw this, I began to say, perhaps, instead of rushing to judgment. Perhaps this is good. Perhaps this is bad. I do not know. I will wait and see." "Does this not make you passive?" Carnot asked. "If nothing is good or bad, why do anything?" "I still act," Ojo said. "When the horse ran away, I searched for it. When my son broke his leg, I called the healer. When the soldiers came, I was grateful they left my son behind. I respond to what life brings. But I do not add extra suffering by insisting I know what it all means. I do what seems right in each moment, and I remain open to being surprised by how things unfold." Carnot left that evening thinking deeply about what Ojo had said. In the following years, he noticed how much energy he had spent judging every event as good or bad. And he began to practice what Ojo had shown him. When something happened that seemed terrible, he would pause and say to himself, "Perhaps. We will see." When something happened that seemed wonderful, he would say the same. "Perhaps. We will see." This practice did not make him indifferent. It made him wiser. He still had preferences and took appropriate action. But he stopped being tossed around by his judgments. He stopped suffering the extra pain of insisting things should be other than they were. He found a kind of peace that did not depend on life going his way. This story shows us something profound about the emptiness of our interpretations. Ojo understood that the labels, good fortune, and bad fortune, were stories he was telling, not qualities inherent in the events themselves. The horse running away was not good or bad. It was just a horse running away. The meanings came from his mind, not from the event. We do this constantly. Something happens and we immediately wrap it in interpretation. We tell ourselves stories about what it means, whether it is good or bad, whether it helps or harms us. And these stories shape our experience more than the events themselves do. When Ojo said, "Perhaps, we will see," he was acknowledging the emptiness of his judgments. He was admitting that he did not know the full pattern, that his view was limited, that what seemed one way might turn out to be another. This acknowledgement brought him peace. He could respond to each moment without the additional burden of insisting he knew what it all meant. Buddhism teaches us that suffering often comes not from events themselves, but from our resistance to events we have labeled as bad. The event happens, we call it terrible. Then we suffer both the event and our resistance to it. But when we hold our labels lightly, when we remain open to not knowing what things ultimately mean, we reduce our suffering significantly. This does not make us passive. Ojo still acted appropriately in each situation. But he did not add extra suffering by clinging to interpretations he could not know were true. He lived with more ease, more flexibility, more wisdom. Let us explore another story that shows this teaching from a different perspective. There once lived a potter named Zala who created beautiful vessels. She had been working with clay for 15 years and had developed significant skill. Her work was refined and elegant. People admired the graceful shapes she created and the delicate glazes she applied. But Zala had high standards for herself. She would often work on a piece for days, trying to make it perfect. And when a piece did not turn out exactly as she intended, she would feel frustrated and disappointed. Sometimes she would destroy pieces that others thought were beautiful simply because they did not match her inner vision. One day, Zala was working on a large vase. She had spent 3 days on it. The form was excellent. The proportions were perfect. The surface was smooth and even. She applied a glaze she had mixed specially, a deep blue with subtle variations. She fired it carefully, watching the kiln's temperature with close attention. When the firing was complete and the kiln had cooled, Zala opened it to see her vase. But something had gone wrong during the firing. The glaze had run in unexpected ways. There was a large drip down one side. The color had pulled in some places and left other areas thin. The effect was uneven and chaotic. Nothing like what she had intended. Zala felt a wave of anger and disappointment. 3 days of work, ruined. She pulled the vase from the kiln roughly, ready to smash it and throw away the pieces. It was ugly. It was a failure. It was wrong. But just as she was about to destroy it, her teacher entered the workshop. This teacher, an old woman named Hannah, had taught Zala when she was first learning pottery. Though Zala now worked independently, Hannah still visited occasionally to see what her former student was creating. "What do you have there?" Hannah asked, noticing the vase in Zala's hands. "A mistake," Zala said bitterly. "The glaze ran during firing. It is ruined. I am about to destroy it." Hannah came closer and examined the vase carefully. She turned it slowly, looking at it from all angles. The morning light came through the window and lit up the uneven blue glaze, making it shimmer. "Why would you destroy it?" Hannah asked. "Because it is ugly," Zala said. "Look at how the glaze ran. Look at these drips. Look at how uneven the color is. This is not what I intended. It is a failure." Hannah continued looking at the vase. "I see a landscape," she said. "The way the glaze has run looks like rain falling down a mountain. The pulled color looks like lakes. The thin areas look like mist. This vase looks like the mountains after a storm, with clouds still hanging in the valleys." Zala looked at the vase again, trying to see what her teacher saw. "But that was not what I intended. I wanted a smooth, even color. I wanted perfection." "Yes, you wanted something," Hannah agreed. "And you got something else. But what you got is not inherently ugly. You are calling it ugly because it does not match your intention. The vase itself is empty of being ugly or beautiful. You are the one adding that story. Zala felt confused. But surely some things are truly ugly and some things are truly beautiful. This vase is objectively worse than what I was trying to create. Hannah smiled gently. Is it? Let me ask you something. If someone who had never made pottery, who had never seen your intended design, walked in right now and saw this vase, what would they see? Zala thought about this. They would see a blue vase with uneven glaze. And would they necessarily think it was ugly? I suppose not. They might think it was interesting. They might like the way the glaze runs. Exactly, Hannah said. The ugliness is not in the vase. It is in your story about the vase. You are comparing it to what you intended and finding it lacking. But the vase itself is just a vase. Blue glaze on clay. The story that it is ugly, that it is a failure, that it is ruined, this is your story. It is not the truth of the thing itself. Hannah gestured for Zala to sit down with her. In Zen, we say that things are empty of the meanings we assign to them. Beautiful and ugly are not qualities in objects. They are judgments we make. And these judgments are always based on limited perspective. You judge this vase as ugly because you are comparing it to an idea in your mind. But someone else might judge it as beautiful because they see it with fresh eyes, without that comparison. She picked up the vase and held it up to the light. I have been making pottery for 50 years, and I have learned that some of my most interesting pieces came from what I first thought were mistakes. The glaze that ran in an unexpected way. The crack that appeared during drying. The warping that happened in the kiln. These accidents often created effects I could never have planned. They taught me that my ideas about beauty were too narrow. Zala looked at the vase with new attention. When she stopped comparing it to what she had intended, when she stopped telling herself the story that it was ruined, she could see it differently. The running glaze did create an interesting effect. It did look like a landscape, like rain on mountains. It had a liveliness that her perfectly even glazes sometimes lacked. But I worked hard to learn technique precisely so I could control the outcome, Zala said. If I just let accidents happen, what is the point of skill? Skill is important, Hannah agreed. But skill serves us best when it is held lightly. When we cling too tightly to controlling outcomes, we close ourselves off from happy accidents. We miss the gifts that come from things not going according to plan. The vase you hold is the result of your skill meeting unexpected conditions. Your skill shaped the form beautifully. The accident created an interesting glaze effect. Together they made something you could not have made on purpose. She handed the vase back to Zala. I am not saying you should stop trying to create what you intend. I am saying you should hold your intentions lightly enough to recognize when something unexpected might be valuable. This vase is empty of being a failure. It is also empty of being a success. It is just what it is. The story you tell about it will determine how you relate to it. Zala decided not to destroy the vase. She set it aside and continued with her work, but she kept glancing at it throughout the day. And the more she looked at it without the story of failure, the more she found to appreciate in it. A week later, Zala was preparing for a market where she would sell her pottery. She set out her usual work, the pieces with perfect glazes and even colors. At the last moment, she decided to bring the vase with the running glaze as well. She told herself she probably would not sell it, but she was curious to see how others would respond to it. At the market, most people admired her usual work. But one woman stopped in front of the blue vase and stood there for a long time, just looking at it. Finally, she asked, "How much for this one?" Zala named a price, expecting the woman to say it was too much for such a flawed piece. But the woman paid without hesitation and carefully wrapped the vase to carry home. "This is the most beautiful thing you have," the woman said. "It reminds me of the mountains where I grew up. The way the mist would hang in the valleys after rain. I have been looking for something that captures that feeling. And this vase does it perfectly." After the woman left, Zala stood there thinking about what had happened. She had called the vase ugly. She had almost destroyed it. But this woman had called it beautiful. She had seen in it exactly what Hannah had seen, a landscape, mountains and mist and rain. Which story was true? Her story of failure or the woman's story of beauty? Neither, Zala realized. Both were stories placed on top of what the vase actually was. The vase itself was empty of being beautiful or ugly. It was just blue glaze that had run during firing. The meanings came from the people looking at it, not from the vase itself. This understanding changed how Zala worked. She still aimed for her intended results. She still used her skill to create what she envisioned. But when accidents happened, she no longer rushed to judge them as failures. She would pause and look at what had actually occurred, setting aside her story about what should have happened. Sometimes the accidents truly were problems that needed to be corrected or discarded. But sometimes they revealed possibilities she had not considered. Glaze colors mixing in unexpected ways. Forms warping into interesting shapes. Cracks creating patterns she could never have planned. When she stopped insisting that accidents were bad, she found gifts hidden in them. She also became less attached to her successes. When a piece turned out exactly as she intended, and people praised it, she would feel pleased, but not proud. She understood that beautiful was a story they were placing on the work, just as ugly was a story she had placed on the running glaze. The work itself was empty of these labels. It was just clay and glaze shaped in particular ways. This understanding brought Zala a kind of freedom she had not experienced before. She no longer felt devastated when things went wrong or inflated when things went right. She worked with care and skill, but she held her results lightly. She did her best and then watched with curiosity to see what would happen, knowing that her judgments about success and failure were just stories, not truth. Years later, when younger potters would ask her for advice, she would tell them, "Learn your technique well. Develop your skill. But do not cling to your vision so tightly that you miss what actually happens. The clay will teach you things you did not know. The fire will show you possibilities you did not imagine. Your mistakes will sometimes be your teachers. Hold your stories about success and failure lightly. Let the work be what it is." Buddhism tells us that when we see that our stories are empty, we suffer less. We stop being tossed around by our judgments. Something happens that we label as terrible, and we resist it fiercely, creating additional suffering on top of the difficulty itself. But when we hold our story lightly, when we say, perhaps, we will see, we create space for wisdom to emerge. We respond to what is actually happening instead of fighting our interpretation of what is happening. This teaching does not ask us to pretend everything is wonderful when it clearly is not. It asks us to notice the difference between what is actually happening and the story we tell about what is happening. The event is one thing. Our interpretation of the event is another thing. When we confuse these two, we suffer more than necessary. Ojo still searched for his horse. He still called the healer for his son. He still felt grateful when his son was spared from war. He was not passive or indifferent. But he did not add the extra suffering of insisting he knew what each event ultimately meant. He responded appropriately to what arose while remaining open to being surprised by how things unfolded. Zala still worked with skill and care. She still had preferences about how she wanted her pieces to turn out. But she did not add the extra suffering of rigidly clinging to her vision. When accidents happened, she could look at them with curiosity instead of immediately labeling them as failures. This openness allowed her to see possibilities she would have missed if she had been bound by her stories. The emptiness of our stories is not a problem. It is a liberation. When we stop confusing our interpretations with reality, we become more flexible, more responsive, more able to work with what actually is instead of fighting what we think should be. This is freedom. Not freedom from caring, but freedom from the suffering that comes from clinging to our limited views as if they were absolute truth. Rest now in this moment, exactly as it is, without needing to label it as good or bad. Simply be present to what is actually here, empty of your stories, full of what is real. There is a teaching in the Heart Sutra, one of the most famous texts in Buddhism, that sounds like a paradox. It says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. This teaching confuses many people when they first encounter it. How can form be emptiness? How can emptiness be form? Are these not opposites? But Buddhism shows us that form and emptiness are not two different things. They are the same reality seen from two perspectives. When we look at a wave, we can see it as a distinct form rising from the ocean. But we can also see that the wave is empty of being separate from the ocean. It is ocean water temporarily taking the shape of a wave. The wave is form. The wave is also emptiness. These are not contradictory. They are two ways of seeing the same thing. This teaching is not abstract philosophy. It has practical meaning for how we live. When we understand that form is emptiness, we stop clinging to things as if they were solid and permanent. When we understand that emptiness is form, we stop falling into nihilism or believing nothing matters. We see that everything exists as a dynamic process, always flowing, always changing, but never simply nothing. The ancient Zen masters expressed this teaching in many ways. They would say that mountains are not mountains, then mountains are mountains again. They meant that when we first see a mountain, we think it is a solid, permanent thing. Then we learn it is empty of independent existence, constantly changing, made of smaller parts. Finally we see that the mountain is both form and emptiness simultaneously. It is a mountain, and it is empty. Both truths exist together. We can see this in our own experience if we look closely. Hold your hand before your face. It appears solid, but your hand is mostly empty space. The atoms are tiny particles separated by vast distances. Between the particles is emptiness. Yet your hand is real. It functions. It moves. It feels. The form is not denied by the emptiness. The emptiness does not make the form unreal. They exist together as one reality. Let us explore a story that reveals this truth. There once lived a tea master named Pero who ran a small tea house near a monastery. He had studied tea ceremony for many years and took great care in every aspect of his practice. The preparation of tea, the serving of guests, the arrangement of his tea room, all of these received his complete attention. One day, a famous Zen master named Takido was passing through the region and stopped at Pero's tea house. Pero was honored to serve such an esteemed teacher. He prepared everything with special care. He chose his finest tea bowl, a beautiful piece with a lustrous glaze. He brewed the tea perfectly, measuring the water temperature, whisking it to just the right consistency. When he served the tea to Master Takido, the old monk received the bowl with both hands and examined it carefully. "This is a beautiful bowl," he said. "Where did you find it?" "It was made by a famous potter," Pero replied with some pride. "I saved for 2 years to purchase it. It is the finest piece I own." Master Takido nodded and drank the tea slowly, savoring it. When he finished, he held up the bowl again, looking at it in the light. "Tell me," he said. "Is this bowl full or empty?" Pero looked at the bowl. The tea was gone. "It is empty now, Master. You have drunk all the tea. And before I drank, was it full?" "Yes, it was full of tea." "I see. So sometimes this bowl is full and sometimes it is empty. These are 2 different states of the bowl." Pero was not sure where the master was leading with these questions, but he answered honestly. "Yes, Master. When it contains tea, it is full. When it does not, it is empty." Master Takido smiled gently. "And what about right now, when the tea is gone? Is the bowl empty?" "Yes, it is empty." "Is it?" the master asked. "What is inside the bowl right now?" Pero looked more carefully. "Air is inside the bowl." "So the bowl is full of air?" "I suppose so." "Then is it full or empty?" Pero felt confused. "It is empty of tea but full of air. And if I cover the bowl with a lid so no air can enter, is it empty then? It would still have air inside that was trapped there. And if I could remove all the air, creating a perfect vacuum inside the bowl, would it be empty?" Pero thought about this. Even a vacuum is something. Even empty space is something. So I suppose the bowl would still contain emptiness. Master Takido laughed with delight. "Now you are beginning to see. The bowl is never simply empty. Even when we say it is empty, it is full of something, full of air, full of space, full of emptiness. And when we say it is full of tea, the tea itself is mostly empty space. The atoms are mostly empty space. So the full bowl is also empty. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. He handed the bowl back to Pero. Look at this bowl again. Do not think about it. Just look. What do you see? Pero looked at the bowl in his hands. It was a beautiful object, solid, real. He could feel its weight. He could see its glaze shimmering in the light. This was form. This was undeniably a bowl. But as he looked, he began to see differently. The bowl was not a solid thing. It was mostly empty space. The atoms that made up the clay were tiny particles separated by vast distances. The bowl was more emptiness than matter. And even those tiny particles were not solid. They were vibrations of energy, processes, not things. Where was the solid bowl? When he looked closely, he could not find it. He found only emptiness taking the form of a bowl. I see emptiness, Pero said slowly. But I also see form. They are not separate. Exactly, Master Takedo said. When you see form, you are seeing emptiness arranged in a particular way. When you see emptiness, you are seeing the nature of form. They are not two things. They are one thing seen from two directions. This bowl is form. This bowl is emptiness. Both are true. Neither is more true than the other. He gestured around the tea house. Everything is like this. This room looks solid, but it is mostly empty space. Your body looks substantial, but it is mostly emptiness. The tea you served me looked like a liquid thing, but it was countless molecules in motion, mostly space. Everything that appears as form is also emptiness. Everything that appears as emptiness also manifests as form. Pero sat very still, trying to absorb this teaching. But why does this matter? He asked. Why is it important to see this? Because, Master Takedo said gently, when you see only form, you cling to things as if they were solid and permanent. You suffer when they change or disappear because you believe they were real in a way they never were. But when you see only emptiness, you might fall into believing nothing matters, nothing is real, everything is meaningless. Neither view is complete. He picked up the bowl again. When you see that form is emptiness, you understand that this bowl is not a permanent, solid thing. It arose from conditions. It will return to conditions. It is a temporary manifestation. This understanding brings freedom from clinging. But when you see that emptiness is form, you understand that this does not make the bowl unreal or unimportant. It exists. It serves a function. It has beauty. It matters even though it is empty. This understanding brings freedom from nihilism. He handed the bowl to Pero once more. Hold both truths together. This bowl is empty. This bowl is form. When you can hold both without contradiction, you see clearly. You can appreciate the bowl's beauty without grasping at it. You can use the bowl without believing it is permanent. You can care for it while knowing it will eventually break. This is wisdom. This is freedom. After Master Dikido left, Pero found that he looked at everything differently. He would hold a tea bowl and see both its form and its emptiness simultaneously. He would see the solid ceramic and the spaces between atoms. He would see the beautiful glaze and the temporary arrangement of minerals. Both were real. Both were true. Neither contradicted the other. This changed how he served tea. He no longer clung to his finest bowl as if it were precious beyond measure. He used it freely, knowing that its emptiness meant it was not truly separate from everything else, not truly possessible. But he also cared for it with attention, knowing that even though it was empty, its form had value and beauty in this moment. When the bowl eventually broke, as all bowls do, Pero felt sadness, but not devastation. The form had changed, but the emptiness remained. The atoms that made up the bowl scattered and would become parts of other forms. The bowl had never been a separate, permanent thing. It had always been emptiness temporarily arranged as a bowl. Now that emptiness was arranged differently. The loss was real, but it was not the loss he would have felt before he understood form and emptiness. This story shows us how form and emptiness are not separate. The tea bowl appeared as solid form, but when examined closely, it revealed itself as mostly empty space. When Pero learned to see both the form and the emptiness simultaneously, he found freedom. He could appreciate the bowl without clinging to it as permanent. He could use it without denying its reality. He held both truths together. The Heart Sutra teaches that form does not differ from emptiness, and emptiness does not differ from form. Whatever is form is emptiness. Whatever is emptiness is form. This is not saying that things do not exist. It is saying that things exist as emptiness manifesting. The wave is not separate from the ocean. The bowl is not separate from the emptiness it is made of. When we understand this, we stop being caught between two extremes. We do not grasp at things as if they were solid and permanent. We do not dismiss things as if they were meaningless and unreal. We see clearly that everything exists as a dynamic process, always flowing between form and emptiness, never stopping in either state. Let us explore another story that captures this teaching. In a small village in the mountains, there lived a carpenter named Bai who built houses and furniture. He was skilled at his craft and took pride in his solid, well-made work. When he built a table, it was sturdy and strong. When he built a house, it lasted for generations. He believed in the solidity of things, in the reality of the forms he created. One winter, Bai was hired to build a small hermitage for a monk who wanted to live in solitude on the mountain. Bai worked carefully, selecting the best wood, joining the pieces with precision. He built a small structure that would withstand the harsh mountain weather, with strong walls and a solid roof. When the hermitage was complete, the monk moved in and invited Bai to share tea with him before he descended back to the village. They sat together in the small room Bai had built, and the monk asked him, "What did you build here?" Bai looked around with satisfaction. "I built a solid house. Strong walls to keep out the cold, a good roof to keep out the rain. This hermitage will last many years. The monk nodded. The walls are solid. Very solid. I chose the best timber. The joints are tight. These walls will not fail. Tell me, the monk said, if the walls are completely solid, how did you get inside? How am I sitting in here with you? Bai laughed. The walls are solid, but there is a door. I made an opening so you could enter. Ah, the monk said. So the walls are not completely solid. They have openings. What else did you build that is not solid? Bai thought about this. The windows. I made windows so you could see out and let in light. So there are more openings. What else? Well, the whole interior is empty space. That is what makes the hermitage useful. If it were completely solid, you could not live in it. The monk smiled. So this solid house you built is actually mostly empty space. The walls are just boundaries around emptiness. Without the emptiness, the house would be useless. The emptiness is what makes it a house. Bai had never thought of it this way. He had always focused on the solid parts, the walls and roof that he built. But the monk was right. The purpose of the house was the empty space inside. The solid parts existed only to define and protect that emptiness. But the wood is still solid, Bai said. Even if the house contains emptiness, the walls themselves are solid wood. The monk stood and walked to the wall. He knocked on it with his knuckles. It made a solid sound. This seems solid, yes. But look more closely. What is wood made of? Trees, Bai said. I cut the trees and shaped them into timbers. And what are trees made of? Wood fiber, cells, plant material. And if you looked at those cells under a magnifying glass, what would you see? Bai thought about this. He had once seen a monk studying plant material with a special lens. You would see that the cells have walls, but inside each cell is mostly water and air. So the solid wood is mostly empty space. I suppose so. And the cell walls themselves, what are they made of? I do not know. Smaller parts, I suppose. Yes, smaller and smaller parts, until you reach a level where there are only tiny particles separated by vast spaces. The wood that seems so solid is actually mostly emptiness. The atoms themselves are mostly empty space. When you press your hand against this wall, you are pressing emptiness against emptiness. What keeps them from passing through each other is not solidity but forces between particles. Bai pressed his hand against the wall. It felt completely solid. But the monk was saying that this solidity was an illusion. That what felt like solid wood was actually mostly empty space. This was hard to accept. The monk saw his confusion and said gently, I am not saying the wall does not exist. It clearly exists. You built it. I lean against it. It keeps out the cold. The form is real, but the form is empty. The wall is both solid and empty. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These are not contradictory. They are the same thing. I do not understand, Bai admitted. How can the wall be both solid and empty? The monk thought for a moment, then said, "Let me show you something." He took a handful of snow from outside and brought it into the warm room. "What is this snow?" "Snow," Bai said. "And what is snow made of?" "Ice crystals. Frozen water." The monk held the snow as it began to melt in the warmth of the room. "Watch what happens." The snow melted into water in his palm. He poured the water into a cup and set it near the fire. The water warmed and began to steam. The steam rose and disappeared into the air. "I started with solid snow," the monk said. It became liquid water. Then it became invisible steam. The steam is now mixing with the air in this room. It has become part of the air. Where did the snow go? Did it stop existing? No, Bai said. It changed form. It is still here, just in a different state. Exactly, the monk said. The snow was a temporary form that water took. The water was a temporary form. The steam is a temporary form. But what is the essence? Is it ice? Is it water? Is it steam? Or is it something that moves through all these forms without being fixed as any one of them? Bai began to understand. The essence is not any particular form. It is what takes form. Yes, the monk said. And what is that? Bai thought deeply. Emptiness. The potential to take form. The monk smiled widely. Now you are seeing. The snow is empty of being permanently snow. It is water temporarily frozen. The water is empty of being permanently water. It is H2O molecules temporarily liquid. The molecules themselves are empty of being permanent. They are atoms temporarily bonded. The atoms are empty of being solid. They are particles in space. At every level, when you look for the essence, you find emptiness. But this emptiness is not nothing. It is what manifests as snow, as water, as steam, as air. Form is emptiness taking shape. Emptiness is the nature of form. He gestured to the walls around them. This house you built is the same. The wood is a temporary form that emptiness has taken. Before it was wood, it was a tree. Before that, it was seed and soil and water and sun. After this, when the house decays, it will become soil again. And perhaps another tree will grow from it. The form keeps changing. But the emptiness that manifests as these forms does not come or go. It is always here, always taking new shapes. Bai sat quietly, trying to hold this understanding. The house he had built suddenly seemed less solid, but also more wonderful. It was not a permanent thing he had created. It was emptiness temporarily arranged as a house. The wood had been arranged by the tree's growth. He had rearranged it into walls and roof. Eventually, weather and time would arrange it into something else. But nothing was being created or destroyed. Forms were arising and dissolving, but the emptiness they arose from and dissolved into remained. So when this house falls down, Bai said slowly, it will not really be gone. The form will change, the monk said. But the wood will still exist as something else. The emptiness that manifested as this house will manifest as other things. Nothing is lost. Nothing is gained. Only forms arising and dissolving in emptiness, which is itself form. Bai stood and looked at the walls he had built with new eyes. They were solid and empty simultaneously. Real and impermanent simultaneously. Both truths were present together, not contradicting each other but completing each other. This is a strange teaching, Bai said. It makes my head hurt. The monk laughed. It is strange only because we are used to thinking of form and emptiness as opposites. But they are not opposites. They are the same thing. When you see deeply into form, you find emptiness. When you understand emptiness, you see it manifesting as form. This is not a puzzle to solve with thinking. It is something you see directly when you look clearly at what is actually here. Bai descended the mountain that evening with his mind full of new thoughts. He looked at the trees and saw them as temporary forms that emptiness was taking. He looked at the rocks and saw the same thing. He looked at his own hands and saw that he, too, was a temporary form, mostly empty space, constantly changing, never the same from moment to moment. This understanding did not make him stop building, but it changed how he built. He no longer grasped at his creations as if they were permanent monuments to his skill. He built with care, knowing that each house served its purpose for a time, and then would dissolve back into other forms. He appreciated the beauty of wood and stone while understanding that their solidity was temporary. That emptiness manifested as these materials for a while and would manifest as something else later. Years later, when other carpenters asked him what he had learned from the monk on the mountain, Bai would say, "I learned that everything I build is already falling apart. But this does not make building meaningless. It makes it more meaningful. I am not creating permanent things. I am participating in the endless dance of form and emptiness. The house I build is emptiness taking shape. When it falls down, it is emptiness taking a different shape. Nothing is lost. Nothing is gained. But in between, people have shelter, and that matters." The Heart Sutra's teaching is not asking us to deny the reality of form. The tea bowl is real. The house is real. But they are not real in the way we usually think. When we understand this deeply, we find a middle way between two extremes. The bowl matters because it will not last forever. The house serves because it will eventually fall down. The form is valuable precisely because it is empty of permanence. This understanding brings freedom. We can appreciate beauty without clinging. We can create without attachment to our creations lasting forever. We can love without demanding that the object of our love never change. We see that everything is flowing. Everything is becoming. Nothing is fixed. And in this flow we find not chaos but the natural rhythm of reality expressing itself. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. When we truly understand this, we understand the heart of Buddha's teaching about the nature of existence. We see that everything exists as a dynamic process. Neither something nor nothing, but the dance between form and emptiness that is the nature of all things. Rest in this moment. Notice the form of your body and the empty spaces within it and around it. See how form and emptiness are not separate but two ways of seeing the same reality. Let yourself simply be here. Empty and full. Form and emptiness. Complete as you are. Buddhism teaches us something remarkable about the nature of mind. It says that awareness itself is empty. Not empty of the capacity to know, but empty of fixed content. Like a mirror that reflects everything but holds on to nothing. Like space that allows all things but is defined by none of them. When we look at our experience, we see thoughts, feelings, sensations constantly arising and passing. We tend to identify with these contents. I am angry. I am happy. I am confused. But the Buddha pointed to something deeper. The awareness that knows the anger is not itself angry. The awareness that knows happiness is not itself happy. The awareness that knows confusion is not itself confused. This awareness is like a mirror. A mirror shows you an angry face, but the mirror itself is not angry. It shows you a happy face, but the mirror is not happy. Whatever appears in the mirror remains unchanged, unmarked, empty of being any particular thing. Our awareness is like this. Everything appears in it, but it is not changed by what appears. When we recognize this empty awareness, we find a profound freedom. We are no longer tossed around by every thought and feeling that arises. We see that thoughts come and go, but the awareness that knows them is stable and clear. Emotions rise and fall, but the awareness remains. We discover that we are not our thoughts, not our feelings, not our experiences. We are the empty awareness in which all of these appear. This teaching is sometimes called mirror mind or original mind. The mind before it became cluttered with concepts and judgments and fixed positions. The mind that is naturally clear, naturally spacious, naturally empty of being anything in particular. When we rest in this empty awareness, we respond to life perfectly because we are not carrying the burden of past positions or fixed identities. In Zen, teachers often speak of polishing the mirror of mind. But this is a strange instruction because the mirror is already clear. We do not need to make awareness clear. We need to recognize that it already is clear. The dust that seems to obscure it is our identification with thoughts and feelings. When we see that awareness is separate from its contents, the dust falls away on its own. This teaching can sound abstract, but it points to something we can experience directly right now. You are aware. You are aware of reading these words. You are aware of your surroundings. You are aware of thoughts arising. This awareness is not something distant or theoretical. It is the most intimate thing there is. It is what you are underneath all the changing contents of experience. The practice is not to create this awareness. It is already here. The practice is to recognize it, to rest in it, to stop identifying with the stream of contents and know yourself as the space in which the contents appear. When you do this, you discover a freedom and peace that does not depend on circumstances being a certain way. Let us explore a story that shows this teaching. There once lived a young monk named Noro who had come to a monastery to study meditation. He was earnest and sincere, eager to understand the teachings. His master assigned him a simple task. Every morning he was to polish a large bronze mirror that hung in the meditation hall. Noro took this task seriously. Each morning before dawn, he would take soft cloths and carefully clean the mirror's surface. He would remove any dust or smudges. He would polish it until it shone brightly, reflecting everything clearly. Then he would sit in meditation before it. This went on for many months. Noro polished the mirror each day and sat in meditation. But he felt he was making no progress in his practice. His mind was still full of thoughts. His emotions still disturbed him. He felt he was no closer to enlightenment than when he began. One morning as he was polishing the mirror, his master approached and stood watching him work. After a while, the master asked, "What are you polishing?" Noro looked up, surprised by the question. "I am polishing the mirror, master, as you instructed me to do." "Yes, I can see that," the master said. "But tell me, what are you really polishing? The bronze or something else?" Noro thought about this. "I am polishing the bronze so it will reflect clearly." "And why does the bronze need polishing?" "Because dust settles on it. The dust obscures the reflection." "I see. And when you remove the dust, what happens?" "The mirror reflects clearly again." The master nodded. "And what about the mirror itself? When dust is on it, is the mirror itself dusty, or is the dust only on the surface?" Noro paused in his polishing. "The dust is only on the surface. The mirror itself remains unchanged." "Good. And when you polish away the dust, does the mirror become more mirror-like? Or is it the same mirror that was there all along?" "It is the same mirror. I am only removing what obscured it." The master smiled. "Now tell me, what is this mirror like?" Noro looked at the polished bronze. He could see his own reflection in it clearly. He could see the room reflected. He could see the morning light streaming through the windows. The mirror reflects everything. Whatever is before it appears in it. Does the mirror choose what to reflect? No. It reflects everything equally. And when something moves away from the mirror, does the mirror hold on to its reflection? Noro thought about this. No. When something moves away, its reflection disappears. The mirror does not hold on to anything. So the mirror is empty. Yes, Noro said slowly. The mirror is empty. It reflects everything but holds nothing. The master sat down beside Noro. Your mind is like this mirror. Your awareness is naturally clear, naturally reflective, naturally empty. It reflects all your thoughts, all your emotions, all your experiences. But like this mirror, awareness itself is not changed by what it reflects. A thought of anger appears, and awareness knows it, but awareness itself is not angry. A feeling of sadness arises, and awareness knows it, but awareness itself is not sad. Noro listened carefully, beginning to understand. You have been polishing this mirror for months, the master continued. But the real practice is not polishing bronze. It is recognizing the mirror-like nature of your own awareness. Right now, thoughts are appearing in your awareness. Can you see them? Noro noticed his thoughts. He was thinking about what the master was saying. He was thinking about the mirror. He was thinking about his practice. Yes, I can see my thoughts. And what is seeing the thoughts? Noro paused. My awareness is seeing the thoughts. And is your awareness thinking those thoughts, or is it simply seeing them? Noro looked carefully at his experience. His awareness was like a space in which thoughts appeared. The thoughts came and went, but the awareness that knew them remained steady. The awareness is not thinking. It is only seeing what arises. Exactly. Your awareness is empty like this mirror. It is not your thoughts. It is not your emotions. It is not any particular experience. It is the space in which all experiences appear. When you recognize this, you are no longer caught in the stream of changing thoughts and feelings. You rest as the awareness that knows them all, but is not changed by any of them. The master stood and looked at the polished mirror. Each morning you polish this bronze to remind you to recognize the mirror nature of mind. Not to add anything to awareness, but to see what awareness already is. Empty, clear, reflecting all but grasping nothing. When you rest in this empty awareness, you are home. You are not lost in thoughts about the past or worries about the future. You are simply here, aware, open, free. From that morning on, Noro's practice changed. He still polished the mirror each day. But now he understood what he was really doing. He was reminding himself to rest as empty awareness. When thoughts arose, he would notice that he was aware of them, and he would recognize that the awareness itself was untouched by the content of the thoughts. When emotions arose, he would see them appearing in the mirror of awareness, but he would not confuse himself with them. This brought a remarkable shift in his experience. He was still the same Noro. Thoughts still arose. Emotion still appeared. But there was a space around all of it. A stillness. The awareness that knew everything but was disturbed by nothing. Like the mirror that reflected the whole world but remained empty and clear. Months later, another young monk came to the monastery and was given the task of polishing the mirror. Noro watched him work one morning and then asked, "What are you polishing?" The young monk looked confused. "The mirror, of course." Noro smiled, remembering when his master had asked him the same question. "Yes, but what are you really polishing?" This story reveals the teaching of empty awareness. Noro discovered that awareness is like a mirror. It reflects everything that appears before it. But it is not changed by what it reflects. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, all appear in awareness. But awareness itself remains empty, clear, unmarked. This understanding is deeply liberating. We spend so much energy being caught in our thoughts, identified with our emotions, believing we are the content that passes through awareness. But when we recognize the mirror-like nature of awareness itself, we find a stability that is not dependent on what arises. Zen masters speak of this as original mind or Buddha nature. The mind before it became cluttered with concepts, before it learned to identify with its contents. This empty awareness is always present. It is not something we need to create or achieve. It is what we already are underneath all the thoughts and feelings we have mistaken for ourselves. This is what Noro's master was pointing to when he asked what Noro was really polishing. He was not asking about the bronze mirror. He was pointing to the practice of recognizing the mirror nature of mind. Every time Noro polished the physical mirror, he was being reminded to recognize the empty, reflective nature of his own awareness. This practice does not make difficult emotions disappear. Anger still arises. Sadness still appears. But there is a crucial difference. When we know ourselves as the empty awareness in which these emotions appear, we are not controlled by them. We can feel anger without becoming anger. We can experience sadness without being consumed by sadness. The emotions are real, but they are not who we are. They are reflections in the mirror, not the mirror itself. Let us explore another story that explores this teaching. In a village by a wide river, there lived a woman named Ka who made her living as a river guide. She would ferry people across the river in her boat, help merchants transport goods, and teach children how to read the river's moods. She knew the river intimately, every current and shallow, every season's changes. What Ka loved most was the still water near the riverbank on calm mornings. When there was no wind and no current, the water became perfectly still. So still that it reflected the sky and trees with perfect clarity. She could look down into the water and see the clouds moving across the sky, the birds flying overhead, the branches of trees swaying gently. One morning, a traveling teacher stopped by the river and asked Ka to ferry him across. As they waited for the tide to be right, the teacher sat on the bank and looked at the still water. "This water is remarkable," he said. "Look how clearly it reflects everything." Ka sat beside him. On calm mornings like this, the water becomes like a mirror. I can see the whole world reflected in it. "Tell me," the teacher said, "when you see a bird flying in the reflection, where is the bird?" Ka pointed up. "The real bird is in the sky. The reflection is in the water. And when the bird flies away, what happens to the reflection? It disappears. The water no longer shows the bird. Does the water miss the bird?" Ka smiled at the question. "No, the water does not hold anything. When the bird is there, the water shows it. When the bird is gone, the water shows only sky. So the water is empty of holding anything?" "Yes, I suppose it is." The teacher gestured to the still water. "Your mind is like this water. When it is still, it reflects everything clearly. A thought appears, and the mind knows it, just as the water reflects the bird. The thought passes, and the mind is empty again, just as the water shows only sky when the bird flies away. But most people do not have still minds. They have minds like rough water, disturbed by wind and current." He picked up a stone and tossed it into the still water. Ripples spread out, distorting the reflection. When our minds are disturbed by grasping and resistance, by judgment and attachment, they are like this disturbed water. The reflections are broken and unclear. We cannot see clearly what is actually here. Ka watched the ripples slowly settle and the reflection become clear again. But the water returns to stillness naturally when the disturbance passes. Yes, exactly, the teacher said. The mind is naturally clear and still like this water. It is naturally empty, naturally reflective. But we disturb it constantly with our reactions and judgments. We throw stones into it with our grasping and resistance. Then we cannot see clearly because the water of our mind is too disturbed to reflect accurately. The teacher stood and walked to the water's edge. Look at the reflection of this tree. The tree appears in the water. But the water is not a tree. The water does not become what it reflects. It remains water, empty and clear, even while showing the tree's image. Your awareness is like this. Anger appears in your awareness. But awareness does not become angry. It remains empty and clear even while knowing the anger. Joy appears, but awareness does not become joyful. It remains empty and clear even while knowing the joy. Ka looked at the water with new understanding. She had seen this reflection countless times but had never thought of her mind this way. So when I am angry, if I can recognize that awareness is like the water, I am not the anger. I am the empty awareness in which anger appears. Yes, the teacher said. The anger is real. It appears. But it appears in something that is not itself angry. Like the bird appearing in water that is not itself a bird. When you rest as the empty awareness, you can know the anger without being lost in it. You can see it clearly reflected in the still water of mind, without the water becoming disturbed. He knelt and touched the water gently. The secret is stillness. When the mind is still, it reflects everything clearly without being disturbed by what it reflects. But how do we find this stillness? Ka thought about the river. The water becomes still when I stop disturbing it. When there is no wind, no current, no stones being thrown, the water settles naturally into stillness. Yes, the teacher said. And the mind is the same. It becomes still when we stop disturbing it. When we stop throwing stones of judgment and grasping, when we stop creating wind with our constant thinking and planning, when we allow the mind to be as it naturally is, empty and clear like still water, it settles into its natural state. The teacher prepared to board Ka's boat. You live by this river. You see this still water often. Let it remind you of the nature of your own awareness. Empty, clear, reflecting all but holding nothing. When you remember this, you will not be so disturbed by the thoughts and feelings that appear. You will see them as reflections in still water, arising and passing while the water itself remains unchanged. After the teacher crossed the river and continued his journey, Ka sat by the still water for a long time. She watched clouds drift across the reflection. She watched birds fly through the mirrored sky. She watched leaves fall and create brief ripples before the water settled again to perfect stillness. And she began to watch her own mind the same way. A thought would arise, and she would see it reflected in awareness like a bird reflected in water. The thought would pass, and awareness would be empty again, still and clear. An emotion would appear, strong and vivid like a tree reflected in water. The emotion would fade, and awareness would remain unchanged. She discovered that when she rested as this empty awareness, instead of identifying with the contents that appeared in it, there was a profound peace. She could experience the full range of human thoughts and feelings without being overwhelmed by them. They were all reflections in the still water of awareness, appearing and disappearing while the water itself remained clear. Years passed, and Ka became known not just as a skilled river guide but as someone who seemed unusually peaceful and clear. When people asked her how she remained so calm in difficult situations, she would bring them to the still water in the morning and show them the reflections. "Your mind is like this water," she would tell them. "When you let it be still, it reflects everything clearly. And because it is empty of holding anything, it is never disturbed by what passes through it. The bird flies across, and the water shows it perfectly. The bird flies away, and the water is empty again, ready to reflect whatever comes next. This is the nature of awareness. Empty, clear, always ready, never disturbed." And people would sit by the water with her, watching the reflections appear and disappear, learning to recognize the same quality in their own awareness. The empty mirror that reflects all but holds nothing. The still water that shows everything but is changed by nothing. The natural state of mind that is always here, waiting to be recognized beneath all the disturbance we create. These two stories show us the teaching of empty awareness. Noro learned that awareness is like a mirror, reflecting all thoughts and emotions but unchanged by any of them. Ka learned that awareness is like still water, showing everything clearly but holding nothing. Both discovered that they were not their thoughts or feelings, but the empty awareness in which thoughts and feelings appear. This teaching is at the heart of Zen practice. We are not trying to change our thoughts or eliminate our emotions. We are recognizing what we already are underneath all of that content. Empty awareness, clear knowing, the space in which everything appears but which is itself marked by nothing. When we rest as this empty awareness, several things happen. First, we find stability. Our sense of being is no longer dependent on what thoughts or feelings arise. We remain steady whether the mind is calm or agitated, happy or sad, because we know ourselves as the awareness that witnesses all states without being any particular state. Second, we find freedom. We are no longer compelled to act on every thought or feeling. We can see anger arise without immediately speaking from anger. We can see desire arise without immediately grasping. There is space between the arising and the response. And in that space, wisdom can operate. Third, we find peace. Not the peace of pleasant circumstances, but the peace of not being tossed around by changing circumstances. The mirror remains clear whether it reflects beauty or ugliness. The still water remains still whether it reflects clouds or sun. Empty awareness remains empty whether thoughts are pleasant or unpleasant. The Buddha taught that this empty awareness is our original nature. We have not lost it. We have only forgotten it by identifying too closely with the contents that appear in it. When we remember who we really are, when we recognize ourselves as the empty mirror rather than the reflections, we come home to our true nature. This is not a state we achieve through effort. It is what we already are, revealed when we stop disturbing the water with our constant grasping and resistance. Like Ka's river, which naturally settles to stillness when the wind stops. Our awareness naturally reveals its empty, clear nature when we stop disturbing it with our reactions. The practice is simple but profound. Notice that you are aware. Whatever thought arises, notice that you are aware of it. Whatever feeling appears, notice that you are aware of it. And then notice the awareness itself. Not as an object, but as what you are. The empty space in which everything appears. The mirror that reflects but holds nothing. The still water that shows all but is changed by nothing. When you rest here, you have found what Zen calls your original face. The face you had before you were born. The awareness that was here before any thought arose and will remain after all thoughts cease. Empty, clear, free, home. In daily life, this recognition transforms everything. You can go about your work, care for your family, face challenges and joys, all while resting as empty awareness. The activities continue, the thoughts and feelings continue, but you are no longer lost in them. You know yourself as the space in which they all happen. This does not make you detached or cold. In fact, when you are not caught in your own thoughts and emotions, you can respond to others with more genuine compassion. You can listen more deeply because you are not lost in your own mental reactions. You can act more skillfully because you are not compelled by your own grasping and resistance. The mirror reflects everything equally without preference. When you rest as empty awareness, you meet each moment with this same quality. Not indifferent, but clear. Not passive, but responsive. Not empty of caring, but empty of the fixed positions and reactions that usually cloud our caring. This is the gift of recognizing empty awareness. You discover that beneath all the changing weather of thoughts and emotions, there is a clear sky that is never disturbed. You are that clear sky. You have always been that clear sky. You only need to recognize it. Rest now as awareness itself, not as any particular thought or feeling, but as the empty knowing that witnesses all thoughts and feelings. Notice the spaciousness of this awareness. Notice how it holds everything without grasping anything. Simply rest here, empty and clear, like a mirror reflecting this moment exactly as it is. As we come to the end of our exploration tonight, take a moment to notice where you are. Feel your body resting. Notice the gentle rhythm of your breath. All of this is happening in the spaciousness of awareness, empty and clear. Tonight we have explored emptiness from many perspectives. We discovered how emptiness creates capacity. How the hollow space in a bowl or flute is what makes it useful. We saw how nothing exists independently. How everything arises in dependence on everything else. We recognize that the self is empty of fixed nature, fluid and responsive rather than frozen and rigid. We explored how our stories about reality are empty. How the meanings we assign come from us rather than from events themselves. We saw that form and emptiness are not separate. That every solid thing is also empty space, and emptiness manifests as all forms. We discovered that awareness itself is empty, like a mirror reflecting everything but holding nothing. These teachings may sound abstract, but they point to something deeply practical. When we see emptiness clearly, we find freedom. Freedom from clinging to things that cannot last. Freedom from defending identities that were never solid. Freedom from being tossed around by our interpretations. Freedom to respond to each moment freshly without the burden of fixed positions. Emptiness is not nothingness. It is not loss. It is the liberating truth that nothing is separate, nothing is permanent, nothing is fixed. And in this truth we find connection, flow, and spaciousness. As you drift toward sleep now, let everything soften. Let your body rest completely. Let your thoughts settle like snow falling on still water. You do not need to hold anything together. You can simply be here, empty and full, resting in the natural spaciousness of this moment. Sleep well. And thank you for joining us here at Monk's Moon Temple.